Good morning, everyone. So nice to see every one of you today, and I'm so excited to finish our study on Jacob and Esau. I hope that you have had so much food for thought this week. I know even in our Sabbath school class this morning, there were questions and comments about it, so I know that it's a really good study for us at this time. Let's ask for God's blessing as we begin. We praise you, Lord, for your unbelievable mercy over every one of us. We praise you for your holiness and for your righteousness. We ask that you would continue to mold us and make us more like Jesus. And may we see the truth about ourselves in our study today, for we ask it in Christ's name. Amen. If you would go to Genesis chapter 28. As I was rereading this this week, I had a problem with one word. I thought this doesn't really read the way that it should. And as I went digging, we're going to go to verse 20 of chapter 28. It's the word if, which we are very familiar with in the Bible. But in this case, this word has been translated to be if, but it should read since. And the reason that I was troubled with it is because I know that God did not transfer the covenant to Jacob until Jacob had repented of what he had done. That is who God is. He had told Rebekah, since the children were in her womb, that the younger would serve the older. And he's basically telling her that Jacob would be given the birthright. Didn't tell her how it was going to happen, and we know that they take matters into their own hands and make a big mess. But once God and Jacob have this experience where he gives him this vivid dream and reveals to him this ladder that symbolizes the fact that there's connection between God and us. And Jacob is astounded by this dream. But he gives him the dream because he has sorrow for what he did. He left a huge mess behind. He was a deceiver. He tricked his father. He tricked his brother. He was greedy. He went along with his mother's plan and he carried it out. And he made and left a huge mess. And then he left fleeing for his life because his brother was so angry he wanted to kill him. How amazing is God to be able to get past all of that with Jacob. And as Jacob has to leave and flee for his life, he has an experience. I believe he realizes the depths of his sin, and it takes him to depths of sorrow for his sin, and God gives him this vision. And so in verse 20, how it should read, if it was a better translation, that he makes a vow because God says, I am with you, in verse 15, I will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I promised you. And so God transfers the covenant, goes from Abraham to Isaac, now to Jacob, that through Jacob is going to come blessings for all the nations, and that he's going to bring him back. So all things will be set right. And so Jacob's response is a vow, and he says, since God, that if it was a better translation would be since, and it makes more sense to me. Since God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey that I am taking and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's house, he's embracing the promise, then the Lord will be my God, and this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house, and all that you give me, I will give you 1/10. He makes a vow. This is the first vow in the Bible. He makes a vow of gratitude. He is so grateful, and he also expresses that he is obligated and will be obligated to God to fulfill and be part of this covenant. And so even though the transfer of the covenant happens, there is a lot that Jacob still has to learn. This is just the beginning of what God is going to do through Jacob's life. And submission, he's going to learn through the circumstances in his life. Well, as the story goes, and we don't have time to go through the whole story, I want to hit the highlights because it's an amazing story. First, about who God is. Grand beyond working through the messes that we make. Last week I asked you to look at the fact that Jacob and Esau represent two groups of people. And from those two groups of people, God's making a third group of people. He's extracting those that are faithful. He's extracting the honest-hearted, and he makes them into saints. So saints were either non-religious wicked or religious wicked. And I asked you to look at the fact that which one are you? Well, I'm assuming that because you are sitting in this church, that you are a religious wicked. Like Jacob was. Is that good news today? Well, he goes on, and obviously, in order to be the father of many nations, he will have to have a bride. God takes him to a bride, and she just happens to be the daughter of a bigger weasel than he is. Yeah. So he is so excited. It's basically love at first sight. Basically, love at first sight when he meets Rachel. And so if you go to chapter 29, and we'll read that he had two daughters. Now Laban, or actually more than two daughters, but these are the two we're going to talk about. Now Laban had two daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel was lovely in form and beautiful. Jacob was in love with Rachel and said, "I'll work for you for 7 years in return for your younger daughter, Rachel." Now, Jacob had nothing to offer. He had no dowry. He had nothing to give, except all he had that he could give would be hard work. So Laban, being the opportunist that he is, and being even more greedy than Jacob, he accepts, and let's have a big wedding. Not knowing that Laban has a sneaky plan to actually give him more than he bargained for. And you know that, they had a feast, which back then feasts lasted for 7 days, big wedding parties. And I'm imagining that by the time they're going to consummate the marriage, that he's had a lot to drink, because that's the only way that this could have happened. And we know that when Jacob wakes up in the morning, lo and behold, there is Leah and not Rachel. Imagine how deceived he felt. Maybe for the first time, understanding the depths on a different level, deeper level, what deception causes. Now he is on the other side of deception. And he says to him, "What have you done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me?" He meets his match, and imagine, Jacob can't believe that his own relative did this to him. After he just left all the relatives behind and just did the very same thing to them, he has met his match. Laban doesn't know that he has set up a very hostile situation between these two daughters. And what amazes me about this, these two women now will be in competition to see who can give Jacob the most sons, because that was the value back then of a woman, is to provide not daughters, but sons to the husband. And so I'm sure that it was a race to see who was going to have the first boy. The Bible says that the Lord saw in verse 31 that Leah was not loved, so he opened her womb. He knows the situation, but it is what it is. He had to work another 7 years for Rachel, so he's going to wind up working 14 years to get these two wives. He didn't want to have the first wife. Laban actually he imposed it on him, made this situation for him not too different from the situation that he created back at home with the whole deception thing. So imagine the lessons that God is teaching Jacob about deception and about greed. Well, it's interesting to me that from Leah and Rachel and their maidservants come the 12 tribes of Israel. And Leah produces 6. Leah produces half. God blesses her to be more fruitful because of what she's enduring. Can you imagine? I mean, back then women just went along with the way things were. And here's the dad saying, here, let me put a veil on you. You go in there and you go sleep with this man. He doesn't realize that you're not Rachel, but it's okay. So she has to do what she's told. And now she's in a situation where he's hostile and Rachel's hostile toward him, because neither one of them wanted her to be part of this family. So it's a very difficult situation. I can't even imagine what it's like. But it makes me look at God in a whole different way. How he works through circumstances that you and I create. One to another, to another, to another, by not waiting most of the time. A lot of our trouble comes because we choose not to wait on God. We want what we want now. Well, the maidservants also have children, and so between all of them, Leah has 6, Rachel has 2, and the maidservants have 2. And these are the 12 tribes. Wow. And it's interesting that the firstborn is not going to get the birthright from this family either. So it's not just because the firstborn, it's an automatic thing. It's up to God to decide who's given the responsibility. We know that Jacob and Esau, someone brought up a verse about the Bible says that Jacob God loved, but Esau he hated. And that's a verse that confuses many people. And I have to say, when you read that, you need to go to John 3:16 right away. For God loved everybody except for Esau. Is that what it says? No. What God hates and detests is sin. God hates sin. What we want to have sin to be in degrees. This is a little sin and this is a big sin. But the fact of the matter is, it's just a tiny sin of defiance is all that it takes to be out of God's grace. So God did not like the fact that Esau despised his spiritual responsibility. He didn't want it. God wasn't going to give it to him because he didn't want it, but the fact that Esau was unwilling to take on his spiritual responsibility and do the right thing. And then Jacob wanted it, and he chose to forcefully get it. So neither one of them are in a good place. What is God to do with this mess? He's got 2 bad apples, but one is going to receive healing. And so I think it's very interesting that God leads him to Laban and teaches him a lot of lessons about life and a lot of lessons about himself. And usually you and I learn and get to the core of who we are when we're up against someone that's just like us, or when we see that someone has a certain defect and it's the same defect that we have, we can see it clearly. So after he serves him for his 14 years, verse 25 of chapter 30, after Rachel gave birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, "Send me on my way so that I can go back to my own homeland. Give me my wives and children for whom I have served you, and I will be on my way. You know how much work I've done for you." But Mr. Greedy twists his arm and says, "Please stay. The Lord has revealed to me that all of the blessings that I have come because of you. So name your wages and I'll pay them. Verse 29, Jacob said to him, you know how I have worked for you and how your livestock has fared under my care. The little that you had before I came has increased greatly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I have been. But now, when may I do something for my own household? Laban sees we can enter into a new contract. Hooray. So he says, don't give me anything. I will take all the spotted and streaked animals and you keep all the others for yourself. Laban thinks that he's pulled the wool over Jacob. He's thinking, wow, this guy is really not too bright. Because in the Orient, sheep are always white and goats are black. That's how it was. So white sheep with white sheep make white sheep, and black goats with black goats make black goats. So he's thinking, that's a no-brainer, as most of you would say. I'll take that. He's going to work for me for who knows how many more years, and my flock is going to increase, and God's going to bless him. So I'll take it. Not knowing that God is going to bless Jacob and that more spotted and streaked animals are going to come from this arrangement. Wow. So, let's go to verse 31. Let's read verse 43. In this way, the man grew exceedingly prosperous and came to own large flocks and maidservants and menservants and camels and donkeys. God blesses him so much that now he has his own wealth to take care of his own family. And now God says, now that you have what you need and you've been here for 20 years and you've worked for 20 years, this is what I'm giving you for. Can you imagine? All of this time he has been toiling and Laban has been happy to take all of this hard work for nothing. And he thinks he's probably going to keep Jacob there forever because he'll never have any spotted and streaked. Now Jacob had been very smart to go off and take the herds away so that Laban didn't know what was going on. And now God says, it's time for you to go back. Verse 31, verse 3. The Lord said to Jacob, go back to the land of your fathers and leave your relatives, and I will be with you. Jacob has entered into a wonderful relationship with the Lord. And he trusts him. He is not worried about where things are going to come from. The Lord has been taking his greediness away and molding him into a character of holiness and righteousness. He's learned to trust God. He's learned to accept what's there. He's learned to become an honest-hearted man. And God has totally blessed him. And now he tells him, now it's time to go back. I imagine that he is so excited about leaving, but also a little worried about heading back and what he's going to find when he gets back. So he tells his wives that he had a dream, verse 10, and in that dream, God reveals to him how in the mating of these animals, he's going to multiply and bless him. And so he says, now all of this is ours. And the women say in verse 14, Rachel and Leah replied, do we still have any share in the inheritance of our father's estate? Does he not regard us foreigners? Not only has he sold us, which they weren't too happy that he traded them off for work, but he has used up what was paid for us. Surely all the wealth that God took away from our father belongs to us and our children. So do whatever God has told you. God has told you to go back to your homeland. Let's go. We will do it. Now, Jacob decides not to tell Laban. He decides just to outwit him, take his stuff and go. And Laban is not very happy about this. So let's look at verse 22. On the third day, Laban was told that Jacob had fled. Taking his relatives with him, he pursued Jacob for 7 days and caught up with him in the hill country of Gilead. Then God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream at night and said to him, "Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad." Isn't this amazing? Jacob has been blessed by the Lord and he's leaving. He has the birthright. The Lord is going to continue the work that he started through Jacob. He has allowed Jacob 20 years of hard labor in lessons for the horrible situation that he created and caused. He gave him a hard taskmaster in Laban, someone that was just like himself but worse. And now he's told him to leave. And Laban is not taking to this very kindly. He's losing, number one, his labor, his free labor. And number two, he knows that God's blessings are on Jacob, so he's going to miss out on that. And no telling what he had in his mind to do, but what does God do? He intervenes and he tells Laban, "Be silent. Don't even go there." So he pretends that he comes and says, "You've carried off my daughters. How could you do this to me after you've been living with me for so long?" And sings his pity party. And Jacob tells him how it is. He says in verse 42, "If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been with me, you would surely have sent me away empty-handed. Don't come pretending that you're looking after my welfare. You would have been glad to tell me, if you're not going to stay here and work for me, then leave with the clothes off your back." He said, "But God has seen my hardship and the toil of my hands, and last night he rebuked you." Ooh. Laban didn't know that Jacob knew that little tidbit. Laban doesn't apologize for being a weasel. He doesn't apologize for being greedy. He doesn't ever apologize for tricking him with Leah. He basically says, okay, let's not talk about this anymore. Let's just make a peace offering. Okay, let's just have peace. What do we say? Let's part friends. And so the Lord gives Jacob a graceful exit. He leaves peace between him and Laban. Laban goes back home. And now, for the true test of what Jacob has learned from the Lord, what these 20 years have formed inside of Jacob, he knows now he has to go back and deal with his brother. He knows he has to make things right with his brother. And imagine the angst in there. The last time that he knew anything about his brother said, "As soon as my father dies, I'm going to kill him." So Jacob leaves, and he decides that he is going to pave the way. And I love this, and I love what God has done with him, because he understands, even though God's favor is on him, he still has to make things right. He can't leave that undone. And so notice that what Jacob does is he gets hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of animals together and asks for his servants to take them on ahead. God has turned a greedy Jacob into a generous man. And he says, "Take these animals and take them and tell my brother they're a gift from me." And so he is going to try to pave the way with love and kindness and restitution for what he took, for what he stole in the birthright. And here is where we know that Jacob's heart has been changed. We know that he has totally given himself over to the Lord in verse 9 of chapter 32. Then Jacob prayed, "O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, go back to your country and your relatives, and I will make you prosper. Wow, what a beautiful whole sentence of title to who the Lord is. He says, I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness that you have shown your servant. Wow. A total change of heart. He has gone from being one of the non-religious wicked to a saint. During the Great Tribulation, there will be 3 groups. The religious wicked, all of the Pharisees that are walking around. The non-religious wicked, I don't believe in God. And the saints. And God will be taking and extracting those that choose to have honest hearts and choose to submit to Him and love Him, and putting them in the camp of the saints. And then the religious wicked and the non-religious wicked will make up the group that's called the goats. And when Jesus comes, there will be 2 groups, the saints and the goats. And to the story of Jacob and Esau, now we know about Esau's life is that Paul says in the book of Hebrews that Esau was a godless man. So apparently, even though he's someone who did good things from time to time, he never came around to submission to God's terms. Jacob, however, there is evidence in his humility here to understand the truth about himself. I am unworthy of everything that you have done for me. Do you get that? Do you get that right now as you're sitting here? That you and I are unworthy of any blessing God has given us? And that everything and anything that we have has been from His great hand? When Jacob left, he had nothing. He had to flee with nothing. And God gave him a family, and God gave him possessions. And God gave him the possessions that he would need in order to even make restitution to his brother with. How awesome and how great is the Lord? The provider of all things all the time. If we will just wait on Him. He says, I had only my staff when I crossed this Jordan. That's what he had. I had only my staff. But now I have become 2 groups. He has 2 wives, lots of people. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau. For I am afraid he will come and attack me, and also the mothers with their children. But God, I'm remembering what you told me here. This is what's keeping him from having a total anxiety attack here. I will surely make you prosper, and I will make your descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted. He's worried about, he's afraid. He states he's afraid, but if his brother kills him, how can he be the father of many nations? It's like, I'm hanging on to this promise that if I'm going to do that, that means things are going to be okay, Lord. I'm just hanging on to you. Please, Lord, is it going to be okay? I need to know. Please save me. Is everything going to be all right? I'm afraid. So he sends his family on, and he decides he has to stop. And I know that he stopped by himself because he needed for God to set his heart at peace. Dear ones, when you and I need peace, when we need to know God's presence, we need to separate ourselves and have alone time. When you are churning and just groaning under the weight of burden, when you are afraid, when you don't know what to do next, when you cannot see what is coming, when you don't understand your circumstances, where you and I need to be is alone with God. We don't need to wrestle with our problems. We need to wrestle with the Lord. And this, where God brings Jacob, this here is just the icing on the cake of this amazing story of an unbelievable God and what He does with unworthy people, wicked people. Jacob stays there, and I know that he's just pondering, have I done enough? Did I send enough restitution? Is the Lord pleased with me?